All right, what is going on, everybody? I'm Trent McCluskey back with Tim Berzins from Amplified Metabolism. And today we want to talk about dairy because everyone nowadays is saying that dairy causes inflammation. It should be avoided and everything like that. But we wanted to kind of get down to it because we kind of look at dairy as one of the most like nutrient dense, easy digestible foods that you can actually eat, right? So we wanted to kind of share our thoughts on that and see how dairy can actually be a more beneficial food to include in your diet. So what's going on, Tim? How you doing?
Yeah, what's going on? Yeah, dairy is a really interesting one because I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of people freak out about dairy. A lot of people don't like it. Allergies aside, a lot of people who can drink dairy or eat dairy, um, I don't know. I think there's a lot of, there's just a lot of hype around it. People don't really know if it's good for you, if it's not, if it causes bloating, if it causes weight gain.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people are hung up on, or were hung up on that comment. It just sprung in my head of when Arnold Schwarzenegger was asked if he drank milk, and he's like, "No, milk is for babies." It's like, and everyone's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, this bodybuilder doesn't drink milk, so no one should drink milk."
Right. Right.
Like that's not that
Exactly.
simple.
That's actually hilarious. But yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's so funny. But yeah, so there's a bunch of different things to talk about, and I feel like a lot of people only look at maybe one area and say like, oh, this caused inflammation, or I became bloated from dairy, but not looking at the other areas. And that's kind of the whole basis of this podcast, to look at all areas of the spectrum to really get to like the root cause of it actually being healthful or it actually being like something that could hurt your health. And
Hmm.
there's a few things we wanted to cover, of like all the way from like the quality of the dairy that you're actually eating, your current state of health, whether your metabolic rate is like high or low, the additives they put in dairy, and like what you should actually look for whenever you're choosing your dairy. That makes
Yeah.
sense. I think that's
Yeah.
like a
I
good
agree.
spectrum
Yeah,
to cover.
for sure. I thought this was a really cool way to think about it. Just from a very high level perspective, is that if you think about all the different types of foods you can eat, the only foods that want to be eaten, quote unquote, by nature would be fruits and dairy. And the
Right.
reason is vegetables have, anti-nutrients that they're trying to protect themselves so they can thrive. Meat, obviously, animals are trying to get away. They don't want to be eaten.
Hmm.
All the good stuff. Nuts and seeds. So that's the point with fruit, is that fruit wants to be eaten because it wants
Hmm.
to pass through the digestive tract, and the seeds get excreted in a new place so that a new fruit tree can grow in that new place.
Right.
Like, that's the reproductive cycle. So
Hmm.
fruit, quote unquote, wants to be eaten by an animal. And then in the same side, dairy is created solely for consumption by the animal. The
Hmm.
only question is whether, is that adult animals typically wouldn't eat dairy, whereas adult animals would eat fruit. So, there's some question there. But I think it's
Right.
kind of interesting just from that perspective to consider the fact that, it's really a nutrient rich uh, food source because it's made by nature to be eaten.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
and actually that's a really good way to put it. And yeah, it's so nutrient dense, of like the magnesium, calcium, zinc, phosphorus. Like it's literally so nutrient packed. It's like, gosh, it's like how can you avoid it? And like ask everyone, and they love cheese. Who doesn't love cheese on like
Mhm.
whatever food item it might be?
Yeah.
So I think that's a good place to start on like the quality of dairy, because this is something I've really been experimenting with lately and noticing how it's actually making improvements to my health. Whereas like in the past, I used to think that I was like lactose intolerant, but I was actually eating, say, very commercial dairy. Like I'm trying to think of like some brands. What's that one milk brand, like Dean's or something like that, or just like very commercial
Can't
milk
remember.
brands that
Yeah.
are probably, and coming from cows that are probably, pumped with hormones and not treated in a humane way. This in the factory setting. I know you and I could both speak to like we aren't, for that kind of factory farming, but there
Hmm.
is something to say about like the circle of life. I think that's a whole different kind of
Hmm.
conversation there, but it's like the quality definitely is. It's like if you're eating dairy that's pumped with hormones and, from a cow that's being in a factory, that's definitely going to have probably negative impacts on your health whenever you
For
consume it.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It's similar to eating like meat treated with antibiotics and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Um, I think that a lot of people, when they think of like eating organic, they think of fruits and vegetables. I
Hmm.
actually think if you're going to eat anything organic, it should be things like meat and dairy.
Yes.
Vegetables, you can easily wash them off. And I'm not saying that like non-organic isn't better than organic. Of course it is.
Hmm.
But it's much easier to still, like, fruit and vegetables have a lot of protective agents naturally inside of them, and you can easily wash off anything on the skin.
Hmm.
Whereas like meat has like fat that can store can concentrate
Right.
some pretty nasty hormones and some pretty
Yeah.
nasty antibiotics. And same with dairy.
Yeah. Exactly, 100%. And I think one thing that used to like rip my stomach apart was carinogen. I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm not
Yeah.
100% sure, but
Or carnitine or what, I can't remember.
carrageenan, yeah, which
Yeah.
is basically like a extract from seaweed, but most people have like allergic reaction to it. So every time that I consume milk, whether it was like chocolate milk or normal milk, this is really popular in ice creams. Like even at like Trader Joe's or Whole Foods, if you go there and check out the label, usually on the ice creams they'll have carinogen or whatever. Well, I'm just going to call it carinogen for the sake of this
Yeah.
podcast.
Almost all of them do. Yeah.
All of them do, yeah. And every time I would eat that, I would just think it's the dairy that made me feel bloated or, upset my stomach. But it was actually that, because whenever I started looking at better qualities of dairy, like for example, what I've come to realize, like the best form of milk you can drink is raw milk. And that's an issue because most, especially like for the masses, you can't necessarily have unpasteurized milk because, people with weakened immune systems that could really, make people sick. But then there's also a lot of research that a lot of human pathogens. I mean, well, first of all, we're exposed to them on an everyday basis, not even just through food. So that, I think that's a whole nother conversation on why people might just try to like nitpick at, milk and have to pasteurize that. But like we're exposed to those pathogens on a daily basis. And I've came across some studies that like, they don't even like milk actually prevents them from actually infecting you. Have you came across like anything like that?
No, I mean, I think that's really interesting. I have heard some of the raw milk arguments that basically state that, if there's some sort of like foodborne illness, it's just as likely to happen in treated milk, because raw milk does have protective ingredients to it and stuff like that. But it's hard to tell. It's hard. It's kind of one of those things that I'm not really sure on.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And like another thing too is like a lot of the milk that kind of upset my stomach and pushed me like to kind of err on like the other side of dairy until I realized like homogenization, that's basically like practice where not practice or whatever. There's like a processing mechanism where like they shuttle or like blow the milk through like little nozzles, and that kind of like degrades the fats and proteins. And on top of like heating it crazy, I think most people are getting like an allergic reaction to those like toxic fats and proteins whenever it's processed like that. Which kind of like
I do know. I do know a lot of people are allergic to casein, one of the proteins in milk. I remember when I had an allergy test when I was a kid, it was like they do shots like all up your arm, all down your back, all down the other arm. And like the only one that I had a slight reaction to was casein. But I can drink milk and I'm perfectly fine. So I think but I also know people who can't have literally a drop of milk and they'll break out in hives. So,
yeah, which is crazy. Yeah.
So
Which
it really depends on that. But
or go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, so it really depends on your personal tolerance for that. But that's a lot different from lactose intolerance. So
Right.
like lactose intolerance isn't necessarily something that is permanent. It can be worked around or completely fixed. So like what would you say to someone who wanted to start drinking dairy, but they had lactose issues?
Yeah, I remember whenever we were living together in Florida, this was kind of like my issue. And one thing I did, well, we need to touch on like the state of health in a sense, because if someone has like a low metabolic rate, they could be like, because there's a lot of the amino acid tryptophan in milk. And if that's getting converted into serotonin, people might have more of a negative effect as opposed to that getting, converted into niacin, where that's where you kind of get that flush or raise in metabolic rate, your hands and feet are warm, you're feeling awesome, but people might get more of a stress response to milk. So I wanted to touch on that if you had any thoughts to share. Because like
I guess the little, what's that?
That's like a big part to dairy as well, I believe.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that we'll lay a little bit of a foundation around the conversion of tryptophan. So tryptophan is an amino acid that can be converted into serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter, or it can be converted into niacin, which is B3, one of the B vitamins. So the working theory through the bioenergetic view is that serotonin specifically is not really the happy hormone that the drug industries like to talk about. That's more of an agenda that they've been pushing, but actually serotonin is more of the hibernation hormone. And I think a lot of things start to make sense when you start to piece those together. We'll go more into serotonin because I think there's some nuances that need to be addressed with that. But it helps a lot to think of it as the hibernation hormone. Anyone who's taken an antidepressant like an SSRI, which stands for a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, basically increases the action of serotonin in your body. Everyone I've talked to who's tried one of those drugs feels like a zombie. You know what I mean? Like you're numb, you're a walking zombie. Like your body's ready for hibernation. So like that's kind of the action of serotonin on at least out of balance
Mm-hmm.
is to put you in hibernation. Now, niacin, on the other hand, is one of the most important B vitamins for the metabolism. All the B vitamins are used in the respiratory energy to create, what we always talk about on here, to convert oxygen into the CO2 using carbon sources like fat and glucose.
Mm-hmm.
So those B vitamins are really important, but also niacin is really important for vasodilation of the blood vessels.
Mm-hmm.
Even some studies are even shown like more than nitric oxide supplements, which we did a video on that recently.
Mm-hmm.
That niacin actually will high doses of niacin will open up your blood vessels and flush the blood all the way to your extremities and everything like that. And so I think when you're eating it in food, when you're eating tryptophan in food, you're really, based on the state that your body's in, you're either going to be converting it towards this hibernation zombie inflammation pathway, or you're going to be converting it into this metabolic energy production pathway. So it's kind of one of those, like, what state are you in while you're drinking the milk?
Exactly.
In addition to how good is the milk that you're drinking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would even add to that, and how are you balancing that much tryptophan as well? Are you getting more pro-metabolic amino acids like the glycine, leucine, alanine, however you pronounce that?
Yeah.
I'm going to butcher all the words on here. But so it's like having that balance of amino acids as well, I think could really impact the response you get from someone drinking dairy. I think another thing, because there's so many different factors here, but everyone is like points, oh, dairy's bad. It's like another thing is like, how's the state of your gut? Like if you're dealing with issues of maybe like SIBO, like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and like your gut microbiome is all out of whack, those bad bacteria could feed on the lactose and then, start producing endotoxin and then, further lead to that inflammation, right? So I think it's also on the state of your gut as well, which is a whole nother probably conversation as well.
Yeah. And then, okay, so we'll go down even another path, which is the insulin sensitivity path, which is that dairy is particularly insulinogenic, which means that it produces more insulin than other foods do for the same amount of carbohydrates. The insulin load is higher. And I think that has to do with the proteins, because there's a lot of like really fat, like whey is really fast digesting protein, and it has effects on insulin. And when you combine that with the lactose and the other sugars in milk, then you're basically like, you're signaling a lot of insulin. Well, if you are sensitive to insulin, then that's not a bad thing at all. You're actually going to be in a really good state because you have carbs and really quality protein amino acids that your muscles and your organs are now going to respond to insulin, let in the carbs and the protein, and increase the metabolism and use those proteins to repair and heal and grow and all that good stuff. But if you're not sensitive to insulin, if you have some problems with that, like diabetes or pre-diabetes, then you're not going to respond to that insulin, and so it's just going to pump it up higher and higher. And I think that's actually where a lot of people get fat gain issues, because their insulin gets shot up from it, and it just causes a whole host of things. But again, that won't happen if you're sensitive to insulin. So it really depends on the state that you are in, when you drink it.
Which damn, that just opened up a whole nother door as well. Like if you're consuming a ton of bad fats like canola oil, vegetable oil, that's going to hurt your insulin sensitivity as well, which then you throw dairy on top of that, you can get a bad response there as well. On top of that, if that's bad dairy as well. So I guess like the first couple tips are like definitely starting to listen to and apply all the tips we're talking about on all these episodes, because you kind of have to like upgrade your health on a whole. But I know some more actionable tips to say if you're working towards that. I know whenever I was starting to introduce dairy back in, it's all about the quality. I found milk actually at like a little local convenience store. It's more like a small family owned, where they get like imported products from like local farmers. And that's where I found raw milk, and also like this low temp pasteurized, non-homogenized milk. So that's definitely a better quality than like the commercial milk. But one thing, definitely heat it. I warm up my milk because like a little thing is like you pour it out of the fridge, that could be at where like 37, 40 degrees ish kind of whatever. But basically like your stomach enzymes aren't going to be like functioning the best at a cold temperature. They function best at a higher temperature. If you're dumping cold milk on there, your lactase enzymes might not be able to digest the lactose that efficiently. So warming up and like maybe starting in like 2-ounce little spurts could help get your body more used to digestion the lactose, like it did for me. Like I did that for like 1 or 2 weeks straight. I'm just going like 2 ounces and then slowly increasing the dosage of a good quality milk. And that kind of helped my body get more used to it again. because really I think I was getting the bad reaction to, one, my health not being in a good state, and two, just having additives like carinogen and this more commercial dairy that wasn't the best quality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've heard the same thing about, especially in relation to the lactase enzyme for lactose intolerant people, that drinking warm milk actually prevents that reaction, or because your stomach enzymes are better able to digest that lactose. Because what lactose intolerance is, basically your body doesn't produce the lactase enzyme, which breaks down the disaccharide, so it has two molecules, glucose and galactose, and those combine to form lactose. And normally lactase will break those apart and then your body will absorb them. If lactase isn't working, then that travels to your low intestine, and that's where the gut bacteria will feed on it and produce methane gas, which then you excrete in the manner that we are all familiar with.
Yes.
And so like if you drink it warm, those enzymes are going to be more active. I've also heard drinking it with a meal helps to like basically dissipate and slow the digestion, so you have a little bit more time. Your body has some more time to ramp it up. What else would you recommend for someone that's like that thinks they has lactose intolerant, or like working up to it? Because I know for me, if I haven't had dairy for a while, I'll notice some symptoms, but then like by day 2 or day 3, I'm fine and I can have it and there's no problems with it.
Yeah, exactly. Another one of my favorites is actually having it with coffee, like more in the morning. Coffee, because it's always going to raise the metabolic rate, which then helped me always digest it a lot better and more efficiently. Yeah.
What's your you have a coffee recipe, right?
Yeah, go all day butter coffee.
Okay,
That's what's on it. So basically, it's like 6 ounces of coffee, and you can use butter or milk. I've been using butter lately, and do a full tablespoon, which is like 100 calories, and then also 2 tablespoons of maple syrup, and then also collagen. And I blend it up, and it's like phenomenal.
That's awesome.
It's like the right amount of buttery, but also sweet. But then you get some protein in there as well. And yeah.
Does it have like a strong maple flavor, or?
It almost like, I keep it so like with 6 to 7 ounces of coffee is like a good balance of like not being super sweet and not being like super buttery. It's just like, it's a good ratio. It's really good. Yeah.
We should definitely do a whole episode on coffee, because I want to talk about a few things with that. I kind of want to go into it now, but I'll save it because I want to stay on topic.
Definitely. Another thing I learned from Nathan Hatch from Fuck Portion Control, he kind of is one to kind of introduce sodium acetate, where basically you're mixing baking soda and apple cider vinegar to get that sodium acetate byproduct. And that's really good for clearing out the bad bacteria in your gut. And I was doing that for a couple of weeks. I think that kind of helped reset my gut microbiome to kill off any of that bacteria. Because I noticed the same thing every time I would have dairy, whether it's cheese, get so much digestive stress. I would be bloated for like hours on end. And I was like, what the heck is going on? So usually that's an indication of that bad bacteria feeding on that lactose. So sodium acetate helped clear that out for me a little bit as well.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, I think the ideal is to produce enough lactase enzyme that you wouldn't need to worry about what the gut's doing. It's kind of like we were talking about this in the bile acid episode, that if you don't absorb, like what you don't absorb in your small intestine, which is really where you should be absorbing all your nutrients, like what you don't absorb there is going to end up in your large intestine. And that's where it's kind of like the bacteria will clean house on whatever your body was not able to digest. And so like your gut bacteria profile, like what kind of bacteria are living there, is going to depend on what you're not digesting. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so like that's why fiber is so important, because fiber, you don't digest fiber, so it goes through you and your bacteria feed on it, but it usually will selectively feed the bacteria that you want and not the bacteria that you don't want. Whereas if you're not digesting fat, or you're not digesting lactose, and those get through, you're going to be feeding some bacteria that you don't want. They're going to be producing endotoxin. They're going to be, ripping tiny holes in your large intestine, leaky gut syndrome, and letting in molecules that you don't really want. So basically like your barrier between the inside of your body and the outer world becomes weakened. And so now like you have your body has less control over what stays in and what stays out. And you need to have that strong barrier to keep it. But that's probably more of a topic for gut health specifically.
Yeah, 100%.
When we get into that, yeah.
Yeah, definitely have to do a whole episode on gut health for sure. That's going to be probably a long one too.
So I do want to also get to, we've been talking about, I think, like basically milk. But I mean, what do you think about things like yogurt and Greek yogurt and stuff like that?
Yeah, yogurt, it's always a funny thing. I want to hear your opinion too, because I know most yogurts are made with lactic acid. And I think someone who can't really handle, if they're under a lot of stress and already have, tons of buildup of lactic acid in their system, they can't efficiently clear it. I think that could also cause a lot of issues for people as well. So
Mm-hmm.
like, I think if you're in a low metabolic state, you're working on improving your health, I would maybe ditch the yogurt for a little bit, because that lactic acid could be still hurting your gut health and everything. How do you feel
Mm-hmm.
about that? Because I feel like I can now tolerate yogurt very fine, but even in the past, it gave me issues before, and I was starting to connect the dots there. Of maybe I wasn't in the best gut health then, but now I can handle it more efficiently, and I like to include it every now and then, every few days.
Yeah, I think that in general, so like the amount of lactic acid that's in yogurt, I actually would be curious to see like comparatively how many grams of lactic acid are in there compared to like the amount of lactic acid that you produce
Mhm.
during an intense set in the gym.
Right.
Because my guess is that while it does have lactic acid and that part of it is not necessarily wanted from the metabolism perspective,
Hmm.
that it's not enough to have a really bad effect.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of really positives from yogurt, Greek
Hmm.
yogurt and regular yogurt,
Right.
either one,
All the
because like
probiotics as well too.
really good protein. It has some pretty good probiotics in it, which is good for your gut health. And I actually was really surprised. I never had really looked at this before, but it's really a good source of potassium.
Hmm. Oh, that's
So like,
interesting. Yeah, I actually
so
didn't even think about that. Yeah.
yeah, and so like I was looking at, I mean, I've been drinking coconut water lately,
Hmm.
and which is really high in potassium, and kind of just paying attention to that for a little bit, and noticing that having higher potassium to balance out higher sodium, and having both of those electrolytes high is actually having some really good effects.
Hmm.
And so like I started kind of playing around with having yogurt again, having some dairy, and because I realized how rich it is in potassium and sodium, but it's
Hmm.
also rich in calcium, magnesium too. So really, the four main metabolism minerals
Hmm.
are, sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and dairy's rich in all of those. So it's a good source for that as well.
Hmm. Yeah. Are you doing Greek yogurt or just normal yogurt with that?
So regular yogurt actually has more um, potassium and sodium per serving
Hmm.
than Greek yogurt does, and then the more fat in the yogurt, the less sodium, potassium. So I've been playing around with kind of like non-fat plain yogurt. It has more carbs and less protein, but it has more electrolytes as well.
Hmm.
Honestly, though, I think if I were to like stick with one, I'd probably stick with the Greek yogurt because I
Hmm.
like the taste better and it has more protein,
Hmm.
and it's only like 100 milligrams less of potassium, so it's still really rich in sodium and potassium.
Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
agree 100%. I think what it really boils down to is the quality. I think it really does. Like, because I'm sure you're not eating like I don't know, like Dannon little that monkey yogurt or something like that. You know
Oh
what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Like that commercial yogurt that's not going to be the best quality. They probably have tons of fillers, artificial dyes in there. It's for the coloring, artificial flavoring, all that kind of stuff too. So I think whenever it comes to dairy, and again, I love how you mentioned like meat as well. It's all going to come down to quality. If you can get organic, grass fed, like for example, one of my favorite, I don't want to speak for you, but Jenny's ice cream, like that is like quite literally my favorite ice cream of all time.
I've really wanted to try it, but
Wait,
I
yeah, you
haven't
never
tried it.
tried it yet? Oh
No, I
man.
haven't.
Oh man. Well, a big shout out to Jenny's ice cream. There is no stores here in Austin, Texas, but I can find it like in the like Whole Foods or something like that. But
Okay, nice.
just like all ice creams, some flavors get a little bit out there with their additive just because they're trying to make a flavor. But if you break it
Hmm.
down to like their plain vanilla, it's literally just like honey, organic cane sugar, and like grass grazed milk. Like I never even
Wow.
I heard of grass fed, but that was the first time I heard of grass grazed, which meaning like most of their life that cow has been like in feeding on grass. Whereas grass fed, it could
Outside.
yeah,
Oh,
grass fed
it's like finished on grass.
yeah, grass fed, I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
could be like if you're finished on grass for like 100 days, you can call that grass fed, where they might have had
Mm.
like corn or whatever other products. But like grass grazed, it's like the quality. I made a joke. It's like the Lamborghinis of ice cream because it's like it's pretty expensive, but it's like the
Yeah.
quality is like there. So I
Yeah.
always say like if you're gonna go with dairy, do the best you can. It's really hard to get your hands on raw milk because you got to go through like all the laws. Like I know here in Texas, like you have to like own a share of a cow to be able to drink it because it's like your own raw milk. So you have to like put a down payment, own the cow, and then get it. But I'm very happy with finding a low temp pasteurized, non-homogenized milk. And that has been
Mhm.
nothing but great so far, just because the
Nice.
quality's there. Some grass-fed cows and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I know we had tried. There's that grass milk brand. I think it's
Hmm.
Nature's Horizon or something. I can't remember the
Yeah.
brand.
Yeah.
But I remember like really enjoying that one.
Hmm.
Felt like it was really good. And milk also is really the fat profile is really good. It
Hmm.
has a mostly saturated fat, some monounsaturated fat, which is good. You want some of those. Very low in polyunsaturated fat. So, it's good fat profile as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, gosh, I think that covered a lot of the things we want to cover, and then
Yeah.
definitely opened the doors to a lot of other episodes coming to
Yeah,
link it all.
for
Because
sure. Yeah.
definitely with dairy, it's like it's hard. A lot of people just like to call out dairy for things when they look at it, but it's like not looking at the other areas of like the state of the health of that person, the quality of the dairy. I
Hmm.
remember whenever we were in transition in Florida, moving to a new home, that little month period. I think you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
drinking these Core Power protein shakes, and they were wrecking my stomach. And I was like, what's the issue here? Like, I've been getting better with dairy. Like, what's going on? I read the ingredients, and they have carinogen in it and like a bunch of other emulsify, like the gum additives. And those were ripping my stomach apart. It wasn't the dairy itself. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. So I think that anyone listening to this, if you're, really against dairy, if you have an allergy or you've tried it in the past and you really haven't had, good luck with it, you can get your nutrients in other places. You don't have to get it from dairy. But for those of you who are open to still considering dairy and trying it, if you have any problems, like definitely try doing some of these things that we're talking about. Like heating it up, drinking it or eating it with meals, and that sort of thing. Going for the organic rather than the non-organic. And I think that like as you adapt to it, you probably will notice some pretty good benefits from it. And we had mentioned the niacin conversion from tryptophan. Do you happen to know offhand if there's any like quick way you can kind of help that conversion? Is there isn't there a nutrient that can help with that conversion that if you take it with milk or you
Vitamin C, I believe.
it is
Vitamin
vitamin
C.
C? Okay.
Vitamin
Yeah.
C, and also you can take like a shot of apple cider vinegar as well, which I've read
Okay.
that it kind of helps prevent that bad bacteria from feeding on the lactose.
Okay. Yeah.
Which is kind of related to the sodium acetate. So you can do the sodium
Right.
acetate or just the apple cider vinegar. Because I heard of vinegar milk, or I don't know if there's like a name for it. You mix it all together, but that taste, I never tried it because the taste is probably disgusting. So
Hmm.
drink milk, take a shot of apple cider vinegar after, dilute it with some water so it doesn't burn your throat, and that's good.
Yeah.
Another thing I like doing, if you're kind of you got to make sure your metabolic rate is revved up. Like I mentioned, coffee. Whenever I always digest dairy, the absolute best is after I work out, because your body temperature is always raised. You have that sweat going on, your hands and feet are warm, your body is like super hot. That's whenever I always digest like milk the best, and all dairy products. So that's something
Yeah.
to experiment with as well. Like as opposed to like waking up, you might be maybe in a stress response, you're super cold in the mornings, you might get a totally different outcome of drinking milk then as opposed to like after your workout, for
Yeah.
sure.
I think that it's maybe one of those foods that you wait until you're in a good state to drink it.
Hmm.
Whereas like if you wake up in a stress state, maybe go for something that's easier to digest.
Hmm.
Like if you do like toast with jelly or something, that's a pretty easy to digest food, has
Yeah.
good carbs, that can like kick you into a higher metabolism place. Then have some dairy when you're in
Hmm.
that higher metabolism place, rather than like you just said, starting with dairy and then having problems with it because your body's not like
Right.
revved up into
Yeah.
that respiratory metabolism.
Because
Yeah.
chances are, whenever I do that, I even notice sometimes if I'm in a really stressed spot and I have dairy, I kind of get that kind of a little bit of a bloated, not as bad as I used to in the past, but I kind of feel bloated. And I go, oh, wow. Like I check in with myself, like we talked about in the body awareness, like I was kind of in that stress state, as opposed to having it right after a workout where like my body's already like revved up, it's relaxed, I'm calm, and then I consume it so much better
Yeah.
that way for sure.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. I think that probably sums it up for dairy. So
Mhm.
hope you guys got a lot out of this, and be sure to leave comments and stuff. And we'll see you guys soon.
Yeah, definitely. We'll probably end up be touching back on dairy sometime in the future. But yeah, this is
Yeah,
probably
I
like
want to.
a good intro because it
Good
laid the
intro.
foundation for everything. Yeah.
Exactly.
So
Cool.
awesome. Awesome. I'll see you
Cool.
in the next
All right.
episode.
Yep. See you.
See ya.